Good evening. I welcome all of you tonight. It's good to see everybody here and to hope that you had a good day and are enjoying this beautiful summer weather we're having. So good to have you here. Welcome to all of you. Tonight we welcome David Worthington, and it's good to have you with us, David. Just a couple things. He's had a lifelong investment in teaching and preserving our United Methodist history and history in general. So I'm impressed by all that you've done. This year, David was elected by the General Commission on Archives and History of the United Methodist Church and hired as a global ambassador of Methodist heritage sites. His role is to preserve and promote the work of Methodist heritage landmarks and historic sites. And he does that both in the UK and in the US through public speaking, tour hosting, mission engagement, research, and fundraising. And in his words, he says, "I am committed to continue the work begun by John and Charles Wesley in England nearly 300 years ago, as I believe their story and that of the early Methodist movement remains as relevant today as it did in the 18th century. I believe preserving our history is an act of shaping our future and that we should use our heritage as a means of outreach and mission to engage with people today. As the UMC's global ambassador of Methodist heritage sites, I hope that through my role, we reclaim our identity as Methodists, revive our passion for making disciples, and review our commitment to ministry and mission." Sounds like a big undertaking, and even just your title is impressive, David. So I had to read it through a couple times to get it all out, but we welcome you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm going to be showing you some PowerPoint slides. For those of you who have heard me before, I know that some of you were over in the UK just last year. In that sense, don't give the punchlines away for the jokes, all right? I'll be really upset if you do that. But no, this talk is going to be slightly different because obviously I'm wearing a different hat today with my GCAH hat rather than the New Room hat. But fear not, folks, Bristol will feature, okay? Don't worry yourself, it will. So I was appointed into this role early this year, in May of this year. And in fact, a new role. And that's very excited to come and share this story. Susan kindly invited me, said if you find your way to Kenosha. I found my way to Kenosha, but somehow she's found her way over the other side of the Atlantic. So I don't know how that works out. I have not taken it personally. Yeah, I understand that her sabbatical's going really well. And I'm sure that she's looking forward to coming back and continuing her ministry here in Kenosha. So just to explain, I've got stuff to share with you. I'd like to keep it nice and light and relaxed. Very happy if folks want to shout out questions. We can do Q&As at the end. Like to make sure that people feel engaged and enthused in this. I'm not going to give you a lecture. At least I hope you don't think it's a lecture. This is something which I hope you'll sort of get a sense of enthusiasm that I feel for this, and maybe just give some pause for thought as to how we use our history and our heritage to share and engage with others. Because I think, if I were to ask you the question, do you think all is well with the Methodist movement? I suspect most of you would say there is room for improvement. Is that a fair statement? We could be doing better. So on that basis, let's acknowledge that we do some good things, but there are some lessons to be learned, and I hope that what we'll be able to do is to enable us to reflect on things that we could do to engage with folks. Because bottom line is, I suspect you would like to see these pews full every Sunday, would you not? Would you? Yeah, of course. So on that basis, I think we need to think about how we engage with people in our local communities. The reality is that this building tells a story. Just on the way in, I asked Ruth, when was the building built? 1929. Now, I appreciate in the United States that makes it an old building, does it not? 1929, nearly 100 years old. So in that sense, people in this community will have had an engagement with this building for nearly 100 years. So what are the stories that are associated with this building that impact upon town or city? Are you officially a city in Kenosha? You are a city, okay. What are the stories that you want to tell about this building and Methodism here in this city? Think about that, because I think some of the folks that you engage with in the supermarket or schools or wherever it is that you happen to be visiting will probably want to hear a little bit more about those stories. So what is it that you want to tell them? And I think in sharing those stories, it often then gives us an opportunity to offer an invitation maybe to come to an event, maybe like tonight, or maybe on a Sunday. So lots of ways in which we can begin that engagement process. Right, General Commission on Archives and History. That is based in Madison, New Jersey. Anybody been to Madison, New Jersey? Anybody want to go to Madison, New Jersey? Yeah, I've been a few times. It's a lovely little town there, but it's about an hour west of Manhattan. It's one of the smaller commissions, it's true to say, and I'll show you a picture of it. But it's on the campus of Drew University. Drew is one of the 13 United Methodist seminaries, and I've had the pleasure of speaking there a couple of times and just sharing with those students, because I think it's critical that we engage with students as well. Ultimately, they are going to be the leaders of the future, and if they don't know this story, well, where are we going? So, General Commission. Right. Okay, that's me. That's my title. This image is actually from the New Room in Bristol, where I was the director for 17 years. Back in 2017, we created what we called the Horse Fair Project, which saw new facilities including meeting space, library, cafe, and a new museum. We were then gifted monies to create a stained glass window, and this is a close-up of it. I'll just pop over this side for a moment just to run you through. This is the Broadmead entrance to the new room. Then we have Charles and his son, Charles Wesley Jr. I look upon all the world as my parish. We'll come back to that at some point later. This is St. Andrew's in Epworth. Of course, you recognize that, didn't you, Ruth? Yeah? Yeah? She's busy concentrating on the IT. John, shown here preaching to the masses, including, can you spot the Native American with the headdress here? And some children here at the front. This is not just a heritage story. This, I hope, has some relevance to what we are trying to do today. And then on the far side, you'll see the front of the City Road Chapel in London, where John is buried at the back of, and there he is on his horse, the equestrian horse. So again, you know, the picture begins to tell you some of the story associated with the life of John Wesley. A man whose life has been, let's face it, micro-examined. And I can't speak for anybody else here in the room, but I would not like my life micromanaged and examined in the way that John Wesley's has been, yeah? Or would anybody be up for that? Having a multitude of books written about their motivations for whatever they did. You're brave if you want that level of detail, trust me. Oh, we've gone too quick, too far. Right. Now, Wisdom from the Past, Hope for the Future. That's a grand title, isn't it? Well, I hope what I'm going to part with you is some wisdom, but also hope for the future. Because, folks, we've got to be hopeful, haven't we? Or otherwise, what are we going to do? You know? Let's give up now. Lock the doors and we're on our way. We have to have some hope for the future. Wisdom from the past, that's not my wisdom, by the way. That's the wisdom of many others who passed the generations before us. In terms of the stained glass window, anybody on the trip last year who went to England recognize where that stained glass window is from? Yes, ma'am? That's right, spot on. So the Epworth Church in, yeah, hey, yeah, let's do a high five there, yeah. Exactly right. Yeah, that is the Methodist Church in Epworth. Can't see it at the top, but the best of all, God is with us, said to be John Wesley's final words when he died in London in 1791. The reason why I love this image so much is that you see the two brothers in profile. Of course, you know which way around they are, don't you? Because John's always the lead. He's the man at the front, yeah? If ever you're not quite sure, then always look on top of the head. John Wesley had decided as early as his time at Oxford University that wearing a wig, which is a very common thing for a gentleman in the 18th century to do, was an unnecessary expense. It was an indulgence. And so John was the first hippie of Methodism, kept his hair long. In contrast to Charles, of course, in order to accommodate a wig, men generally would keep their hair short. So always look on top of the head and you'll work it out very quickly indeed, okay? And in some respects, that picture is true of that statement. A picture can say 1,000 words. There is no doubt that John Wesley was the leader of the Methodist movement. His younger brother Charles never sought to challenge him in that role. So from that point of view, yes, he is there at the forefront. He is the leader of the Methodist movement. However, as I'm going to share with you this evening, I think that many of the firsts that we associate with Methodism, in fact, involve Charles and not John. And so from that point of view, I think you'll be an even bigger fan of Charles by the end of the evening. And just to illustrate how I've come to that conclusion, when was the last time any of you read one of John Wesley's 44 sermons? Now, you're all thinking about this, thinking, do you know what, I think I might not have never read a John Wesley sermon. Okay, folks, that's understandable. When did you last sing a Charles Wesley hymn? I think my evening is done. I'll be on my way. Charles is the man. So, in that sense, Methodism was born in song. And I think Charles's ability to take verse and put it into that poetic style has meant that, of course, his hymnody has passed down through the years. And, of course, one of the reasons is, in addition to the beautiful words, is that he's written for all church events, all types of seasons and events in our lives. So there's always a Charles Wesley hymn. A few years ago when William and Kate got married, they're William and Kate to me, you understand, you know, personal friends, because we all know each other in the UK. Yeah, I just WhatsApping her earlier tonight, actually, but yeah, there we go. One of the hymns at their wedding was Love Divine or Love's Excelling. And I welcomed a school group the next week, and I thought, my word, how am I going to engage these young children? So I thought, I've got it. How many of you saw the royal wedding on TV? All the hands went up, yeah? Well, one of the hymns that was sung was Love Divine or Love's Excelling. It was written by Charles Wesley. So there's always a way to get in, isn't there? Yeah? So wisdom from the past, hope for the future. So let's push on and demonstrate that fact. Okay, so that is the offices of the General Commission on Archives and History. If you do find yourself in New Jersey and would like to pop in, they'd love to see you. Anybody seen the Indiana Jones film? I think it was the first one, which, remind me the name of that one. Is that the Lost Ark? Yeah. Do you remember at the end when they've got the Ark of the Covenant and they're taking it into the big storage area? Yeah? It's all coming back to you now, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I think I remember that. Yeah. There is a huge basement area. It's just like that scene where they're taking everything into the archive there. So if you are doing any research, then they are the people to talk to unquestionably. What I'm seeking to do is recognize that there are artifacts and paper documents, but also we have buildings that we want to engage people with. And those buildings, of course, are all over the United States, not exclusively kept in an archive in Drew. So from that point of view, what I'm seeking to do is to share the story of how you can get involved in telling your story. Because everybody has a story, don't they? Everybody has a story. And we all have a story. The Methodist Church has a story. So we need to know what that story is. Can you do an elevator pitch of your story? Are you familiar with the term elevator pitch? Yeah? So you're in a lift. You've got about 30 seconds. What is it you do? 30 seconds is all you've got to talk to that person about what you do. Tough, isn't it? Think about it. But yeah, what's your story? What's our story? One of the ways in which heritage is recognised across the UMC is the Heritage Sunday on May 24th, or the closest Sunday to it, the Aldersgate Sunday. Did you go to see the Aldersgate Flame? Those of you who came over last year, did you see that in London? You did? Yes? Okay. So everybody familiar with the heart being strangely warmed on the 24th of May 1738? Okay. Well, I'm going to present yet more evidence to say that Charles is the man. Charles had his experience 3 days before John, 21st of May 1738, also in London. And I think, and this is where I do get a little mischievous, but I think the two brothers met between the 21st and the 24th. Charles, in an excited, says, "John, I found my heart strangely warmed." At which point John thinks, "That's a great line, I'm having that for my journal." So, Heritage Sunday calls the church to remember the past by committing itself to the continuing call of God. This is all about having the opportunity to engage with others about why we are followers of Jesus, why we believe what we believe, and how we want to share that good news with them. Okay? Use the heritage as a means to do that, but it's not just about telling a story, it's about engaging with the person. So this is the Aldersgate Flame outside the Museum of London in a short distance from City Road where where John is buried, but it goes into full detail here. Now, I will share with you that, of course, the 24th of May is a significant date, although John Wesley only mentioned this once in his journal. And I would like to advocate, and I hope you will support me in this, a far more significant moment in the life of John Wesley happens on the 2nd of April, 1739. To which you will say, why? What happened on the 2nd of April, 1739? You're looking at me quizzically. Well, John had arrived in Bristol just a few days before at the invitation of George Whitefield. We'll talk more about George in a moment. Whitefield, of course, had begun an open-air preaching ministry and was engaged with people in the city. He'd written to many people, inviting them to come and take over this ministry. Why? Because he was going to return to Savannah, Georgia, where he wanted to build an orphanage. There was an exchange of letters said to go on between the two men along the lines of, "John, I want you to come to the city of Bristol to water the plant," the engagement with the Kingswood colliers, to which Wesley is said to have replied, "George, I still feel as though I have a ministry to return to America." Now, those of you who know the story know that perhaps not many people thought John Wesley would want to go back to America after nearly getting legally challenged for not offering communion to Sophie Hopkey. But as a result, he did come to the city of Bristol. And he arrived on the 31st of March, 1739. Now, you can read the journal, but don't fear not, folks, I will share the particular entry with you. He arrived on the 31st of March, 1739. The journal entry reads as follows. "In the evening, I arrived in Bristol and met Mr. Whitefield there. He then goes on to say, I could scarce reconcile myself at first to this strange way of preaching in the fields, of which Mr. Whitefield set me an example. Having been all my life," and then he puts in brackets, "till very lately, so tenacious of every point relating to decency and order, I would have thought the saving of souls almost a sin if it had not been done in a church." Isn't that interesting? That is John Wesley, the High Anglican. He accompanies Whitefield on his preaching engagements, and just 2 days later, at 4 in the afternoon, 2nd of April 1739, he writes, "I submit to be more vile, to preach in the open air for the very first time." Now, I can't speak about whether or not a heartwarming experience, but I believe what happened on the 2nd of April 1739 defines John Wesley's ministry, the open-air preaching. And his heart wasn't strangely warmed, it caught fire on the 2nd of April. So, of course, you can observe the 24th of May, but I would like to maintain that if we're going to change the date, it's got to be the 2nd of April. Are you with me on this? Thank you. I'll get you to sign the documents later then. If you just read this, tell me you get the joke, please. Look, bro, just write the songs, okay? Just write the songs. Well, I thought it was amusing. You can be in on the joke as well. John Wesley and George Whitefield, founders of the Methodist movement. In the 18th century, if you'd said who was the founder, you probably would have come across as many people saying George Whitefield as you would John Wesley. In that sense, I think it's right to recognize that at that time, depending on how you had come across the Methodist movement, you might say one or the other. I did not pose this photograph of these two busts, but don't you love the look of George Whitefield onto John Wesley? Ah, dear, good stuff. Now, again, you probably know George Whitefield traversed across the Atlantic on 17 occasions before literally expiring in Newburyport, Massachusetts in 1771. We haven't got time to get into the whole Arminian and Calvinistic debate, but essentially predestination is what it's all about. But anyway, bottom line is that John Wesley emerges as the leader of the Methodist movement. And as we'll see later, there are far more statues of John than there are of George. But there is one of George. Anybody know where that is? Just in case you're curious, that is George Whitefield, okay? That statue is in Philadelphia. And that was, past tense, was on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. Because Whitefield and Benjamin Franklin, you've probably heard of him, I guess. Yeah. I'd be worried if you hadn't, I must say. Were seen as the founders of what became the University of Pennsylvania. So this used to sit on the campus. But in more recent times, of course, the issue around slavery has come up. And many say, well, Whitefield advocated for the introduction of slavery into Georgia. And on that basis, we don't want his statue on our campus. So that was removed a couple of years ago. Now sits in the storage of the University of Pennsylvania. And I think there's an interesting discussion both in the UK and the US in terms of what story do we want to tell about George Whitefield? You know, unquestionably, the great orator of Methodism. It was said that he could say the word Mesopotamia and women would faint. Everybody okay? You're all right? Good, okay. But yeah, you know, story. He's gone. I head to Richmond for the weekend. Anybody? I don't know how many statues there are left in Richmond these days, but probably not very many in comparison to what they used to be. So yeah, you know, history is alive. It's an active thing. And George Whitefield is no longer stood in that particular location. You will forgive me and indulge me for talking a little bit more about Bristol, but I did spend 17 years as the director, and I think from that point of view, as the oldest Methodist building in the world, I think I've got a legitimate right to talk about Methodist heritage, yeah? Birthplace of American Methodism, again, for those of you who were on the trip last year, you will recognize this, the upper pulpit where John and Charles and many others preached. I've begun to say recently, look, you're very welcome to have your photograph taken in the upper pulpit, but the quid pro quo is that you now have to go and preach the word. This is not a place where you just do a photo opportunity that goes on your social media account. This is a place in which history happened. And if you're going to be a part of it, you're going to be a part of it. In other words, when you return to Kenosha or wherever it is that you've come from, take inspiration from that moment that you stood in that upper pulpit and preached the word. Lower pulpit reserved exclusively for the leading of worship. So Charles Wesley would have heard some of his hymns sung at the New Room for the first time. That's difficult to get your head around, isn't it? There was a moment in time where there was no Charles Wesley hymnody. Can you imagine Charles coming in and saying, I've got a great new hymn, it's called Love Divine or Love's Excelling. I think you're going to love it. No, we like the old hymns. They're good, aren't they? You know, much, much better than what you've come up with, you know. Oh, gosh, yeah. But again, Hark the Herald Angels Sing. Come on. There must be everybody in the world that's sung that at some point. That's your angle. That's your moment to get in. And then the communion table and rail, an original communion table used by John Wesley to serve communion at. Although I must stress, it is the Lord's table and not John Wesley's table. All right, let's get that straight. Methodist Conference, New Room, Bristol, August of 1771. That's where we hear about our dear friend Francis Asbury. Everybody know about Asbury? So he was already an itinerant Methodist preacher traveling around England. He attended his first conference in August of 1771, during the course of which, if you read the minutes of the meeting, these are John Wesley's words, they are not mine, do not shoot the messenger, folks. But Wesley proclaims to those at the conference, our brethren in America call aloud for help. Who is willing to go over and serve? And Asbury says, I made an offer of myself, and it was considered by Mr. Wesley and others that I had a call. Well, all that happened within that space. So just put your hands up. Who was in the new room last year on the trip? So you were there in that space where those words were proclaimed. Did you get a chill down the back of the neck? If not, you need to check your pulse, all right? Yeah? Great space. And obviously I'm a little biased, but, you know, if I can't be biased, well. And then they set sail from the little village just outside Bristol called Pill. And I've taken many American friends there. This monument was put in place back in 1984, the bicentenary of American Methodism, the embarkation point for America, both Francis Asbury and Thomas Coke. And we'll move on to Thomas Coke just in a moment. The first bishops of American Methodism. So Asbury comes over 1771, of course, the year 1771, you are still the colonies. By 1784, when Coke comes over, you are now the United States of America. Based on the number of people that ask me about the monarchy and the royal family, I think some of you want to come back in, yeah? I won't ask you how it's going. Don't talk politics, David, you'll get into a lot of trouble, okay? Well, Thomas Coke was the man who came over in 1784. He was given a piece of correspondence by John, often referred to as Magna Carta of American Methodism, because he and Thomas Watcote and Richard Watcote and Thomas Vasey were ordained by John Wesley in Bristol to come over to America. John said, I have the authority as a presbyter within the Church of England to do this. Charles said, no, you don't, and deeply disagreed. And in that sense, there was a breakdown in the relationship between the two brothers. They were not as close by the end of their respective lives. Well, they then meet in a little chapel called Barrett's Chapel in Delaware. Anybody been to Barrett's Chapel in Delaware? You do need to do your American Methodist Heritage pilgrimage, I think. You know they met there because there's a little plaque on the floor, so it must be true, mustn't it? Yeah. Anybody been to Plymouth, Massachusetts? Yeah, okay, so you've been to the rock on which, yeah, okay. Did you stand on the rock? Because you can't, can you? No. That's right, exactly, yeah. But it was that exact spot where they first set. We know that because it says so, yeah? Yeah. So Thomas Coke, Francis Asbury meet at the Barrett's Chapel in Delaware. They agree to call a conference of preachers that was held over the Christmas period in Baltimore of 1784. Francis Asbury goes from being a deacon to an elder to a superintendent and then bishop within the space of 3 days. It's pretty quick, isn't it? So in that sense, they are the first bishops of American Methodism. There are 2 statues to Francis Asbury here in the United States. Anybody know where those 2 statues are? I'm sorry, sir, I didn't catch that. No, but not these two. But you could be right, but certainly not these two anyway. But we'll check that out. Wikipedia knows everything, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Well, top one here is Drew University, Madison, New Jersey, and it's a copy of this one here, which is in Washington, D.C., at 16th and Mount Pleasant Street. What about this? That was unveiled by President Coolidge in 1929, the pioneer bishop, a pioneer Methodist bishop in America. Can we imagine a future US president unveiling a statue to one of our bishops today? You might not want to answer that question, I don't know. The prophet of the long road. Again, Francis Asbury, like Wesley, up and down the eastern seaboard. And in that sense, those two statues reflect his remarkable ministry on the east coast of America. I was asking this question of Ruth on the way in. I do a lot of work with educational opportunities, who I think you came over with last year. Would you guys be interested in doing something like an American Methodist Heritage Tour, going to places like New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore? Yeah? You're up for that? Okay, thank you for that feedback. Yes, that's right. GCAH serves our church, the Connections Repository, general agencies, Council of Bishops, other major connection offices. We help to not only preserve the historic record, but to make it relevant to today's ministries and future missions. There's some key words in there: relevant, ministries, future missions. Folks, we have a responsibility to take on that heritage and to share it with others. I hope you feel a sense in which we are taking that on in the work we do every day. That's there in the Book of Discipline. Anybody know where this church is out of interest? Is it really going to take an Englishman to inform you of all these insignificant American Methodist heritage sites? This is St. George's in Philadelphia. It's the first place that Francis Asbury preached at. Of course, it wasn't historic St. George's when Asbury spoke there. This is often known as the church that moved the bridge. At which point you say, why is it known as the church that moved the bridge? Well, I will tell you. Anybody who has come into Philadelphia from New Jersey will know that you have to cross the Delaware. As you cross the Delaware, when that bridge was originally planned, the Ben Franklin Bridge, the assumption was made that St. George's would just get demolished, knocked down. It was going to stand in the way of the bridge. The pastor at the time said, not on my watch. So he managed to persuade the city authorities that as the bridge came over, it has a slight curve in it to allow St. George's to remain where it is. So his work ensures that this is the church that moved a bridge. So the next time, because you are going to do this, aren't you, travel from New Jersey into Philadelphia, as you go over, look on your right-hand side, you will see St. George's there. Right. Promotes our heritage. At the heart of our mission lies the commitment to actively promote the rich and diverse heritage of the United Methodist Church. It's rich and it is diverse, and there are elements of it that are uncomfortable to share. There is good, there is bad, and there is ugly. But if you don't share all of history, what you're sharing is a myth. So in that sense, it is a diverse heritage. We engage in a wide variety of activities, bring the church's history to life for a diverse audience. Anybody know where this building is? It has been referenced in the talk already, just to check if anybody's been listening, you know. Talking about circles on the floor, two men meeting. This is Barrett's Chapel in Delaware. Okay. 1780, yeah. Old, isn't it, 1780? Yeah. Well, for US terms, yeah. Our commitment to preserving the heritage of the United Methodist Church is unwavering. We are custodians of a vast collection of historical documents and artifacts, diligently safeguarding them for future generations. Well, that's what that building in Madison is all about, including the vault underneath, of course. And that's true, but I also want you to feel enthused about the stories that you have to share in this space, in this building, in this city. And of course, the buildings allow us to tell those stories. Why are they relevant? I'm going to ask you the next question, guys. You know what it is? Anybody know where this place is on the right-hand side? You need to go on an American Methodist heritage tour, do you not? This is John Street in New York, Lower Manhattan, just a couple of blocks from the World Trade Center. This is the 19th century. This is the third chapel that stood on that site, but it's the oldest Methodist congregation in the United States, the story of Philip Embury. Anybody heard that name before? No. Okay, that's fine. We've got some work to do with you. No, I'm not going to ask you where this is. It's Lovely Lane in Baltimore, but you were all going to say that, weren't you? Yes, we were. Lovely Lane in Baltimore. The website, GCH, discover what it means, United Methodist, deepening our understanding of church's history and teachings, delve into the depths of our church's past to discover the treasures preserved in our buildings and archives. Why Lovely Lane? Well, of course, that's where essentially in 1784, the Methodist Episcopal Church formally established itself. And in that sense, shock, horror, surprise, the Methodist Church in the United States is older than the Methodist Church in Great Britain. Because in Great Britain, we remained a Methodist movement until the very end of the 19th century. Remember, John and Charles Wesley remained Anglican ministers throughout their lives. They were never Methodists in the way we might understand that term today. So you do have something in the United States that's older than the UK. Who knew? Who knew? Well, you do now. Right. Now, if any of you... Yes. So, yeah, Episcopal, of course, today is more associated with the sort of the High Anglican Church, but Episcopal was just reflective of the fact that you had the Methodists coming together with the Episcopal, so the ME Church. I think you've got an ME connection, I'm right in saying? Yes, yeah. So, yeah, it's just, if you like, two denominations coming together under that one banner, so hence Methodist Episcopal. We don't have time this evening to go into all of the different divisions and machinations, but Methodist Episcopal is what was officially founded in 1784, okay? No, that's absolutely fine. We all know who these three are, yeah? Charles, John, and Francis, yeah? And we know that's Charles at the end, don't we? Because why? Look on top of his head. What's he wearing? A wig. John in the center, and of course Francis here. Just a couple of quotes which I wanted to share. Some may sort of mean something to you, may strike a chord, I don't know. But preserving our history is an act of shaping our future. That was read out earlier. I truly believe that. Preserving our history is an act of shaping our future. You're probably familiar with the phrase, the ministry of memory. Capturing these stories is so important, you know. Folks, don't want to break the bad news to you, but, you know, none of us are going to live forever. So the stories that we have, that we want to share, how are those being recorded? How are those being kept and archived? Preserving our history is an act of shaping our future. In that sense, if we're not careful, we're going to repeat those same mistakes again. We learn from our past. Our stories reflect the ideas, achievements, and challenges that have defined us today. And again, that goes back to that fact that history is good, bad, and ugly. If we listen, they can help us decide who we want to become tomorrow. How willing are we to rethink about the way in which we believe and conduct ourselves? If we listen, they can help us decide who we want to become tomorrow. Okay, another little quiz for you here, folks. No, it's all right, I won't go into too much detail. Methodists love a statue, don't they? Don't they love a statue? Right. If I walk down the aisle, you can all still hear me okay, yeah? I'm good with that, am I, Ruth? Yeah, okay. See, I'm just being like a teacher now. I'm going to come behind you just to make sure that all of you behave. Because you can't see me. How long can I be silent before you begin to wonder whether I've left the building? Sorry, you really shouldn't laugh at your own jokes, but when they're that good, you know. 6 statues of John Wesley, top on the left-hand side. It's all right, I won't ask you to name all of them. Let's just run through them, but as I say, Methodists love a statue. That statue, top left-hand side, is John Wesley in Savannah, Georgia. Savannah, Georgia. When you reflect on the fact that when John left Savannah, he did so under a cloud, threat of legal action against him, is it not surprising to think that there is a statue in his honor? I was invited back to the same church, Wesley Monumental Church in Savannah, Georgia. I'm expecting an email from them any day to be saying, where would you like your statue, David, to be put in the city of Savannah? If you move to the top, yeah, don't hold your breath, that's absolutely right. Top in the middle, the Moore Methodist Museum, St. Simon's Island, where Charles spent much of his brief time in America. Gold statue, don't worry folks, I don't think it's full gold, okay? They also have a statue of Christ at St. Simon's Island, but it's not as big as the John Wesley one, okay? And then on the top, on the right-hand side, that's John Wesley in St. Paul's Cathedral, London. He's there in the grounds. If we go down on the bottom on the right-hand side, we can see John at the City Road Chapel. Those of you who were on the tour last year, you'll recognize that. Does anybody remember what the quote is, the inscription on that? Anybody remember that? It says, I look upon all the world as my parish. Anybody know where that quote comes from? No, I'll stop asking the question. I'm going to tell you anyway. The world is my parish. When John Wesley first arrived in the city of Bristol in 1739, he met resistance from both civic and ecclesiastical authorities, including the Bishop of Bristol, a gentleman by the name of Joseph Butler, who said and wrote to him and said, why are you here in the city of Bristol? You have no commission to be in my diocese, and my best advice to you, therefore, is to go. John Wesley wrote back and said, sir, I feel called to the city of Bristol. Until I feel called to go elsewhere, then here in the city of Bristol, I will stay. And he then signs it off by saying, sir, I look upon all the world as my parish. So it's very kind of our friends in London to put a Bristolian quote on a statue, don't you think? One in the centre and the bottom there, John Wesley in Epworth, just a short distance from the old rectory. And then, of course, I'm completely biased in this, but my favourite statue, of course, everyone knows where that is, don't they? Bottom on the left-hand side, the equestrian statue of John Wesley. Where? That's John Wesley's new room. Now, there is an exact replica of this statue in the Wesley Theological Seminary in DC. But I hate to share this with you folks, we've got the original. At the end of the Second World War, we were approached and asked if we were willing to sell it. We sold you London Bridge, so why not sell you a statue, yeah? Well, we politely declined, but we said a copy of it could be taken. So I'm going to be on the Wesley Theological Seminary in a week or two's time, so I'll get the chance to say hello to the copy. Just a quick aside, and do forgive me if I shared this with you when you came over last year. We now have an education officer at the new room, but prior to that, I was responsible for leading school groups. Any school teachers amongst us here tonight? I suspect there are some. Yeah. Well, at the end of my talk, I asked the fatal question, didn't I? You know, anybody got any questions? To which a little boy puts his hand up and says, yes. What was John Wesley's horse called? Well, what can one say? He would have had many horses in that 50-year preaching ministry. So, being the son of a teacher, I understand that if you don't know the answer, you put the question back to the child. What would you have called John Wesley's horse? To which the boy replied, without hesitation. He'd obviously given thought to this. Alan. Any Anybody called Alan tonight? No? Okay, fine. Still don't know why it's Alan, but there you go. So you're in on the secret now. If you want to know the name of John Wesley's horse, it was Alan. Now, Bristol is a city that many people do tour guides around. Bristol is a city where we develop supersonic aircraft, Concorde. You're familiar with that, I guess, yeah? Or Wallace and Gromit, Aardman Animations. Anybody know those plasticine characters? Or Banksy, the graffiti artist. Anyway, lots of tour guides come around. I hope we never get to the day when the tour guide says, and I'd like to introduce you to Alan the horse, but we don't know who the rider is on top. That's the challenge, folks. Do not assume that just because we know that's John Wesley, everybody else does. And again, just to finish off as to why I think Charles is really the forgotten man of Methodism, and we need to change that and change it quickly. You know that both brothers returned from America early. Charles came over first, but like on the way over, they encountered a storm which meant the boat had to go back into the harbor of Boston, Massachusetts. Now, if I said to you, name me a significant church in Boston City, yeah? You would probably say Old North Church, yeah? Because the midnight ride of Paul Revere, the lanterns and all that story, yeah? This is in Old North Church. Charles Wesley preached in Old North Church. 1736, well before Paul Revere. I love the wording on this. Co-founder of Methodism. I wonder what John might think to that. Co-founder of Methodism. In this church, September, October 1736. Sweet singer of evangelical Anglicanism and poet of jubilant Methodism. Are we feeling that jubilant tonight? Jubilant Methodism. Put up by the bishops, Council of Bishops, 1961. Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing. Written for the anniversary of Charles's conversion in 1738. But you knew that, didn't you? Okay, I'm going to finish at this point. When I was in DC a few years ago, I took the opportunity to go to the National Archives building in DC. I suspect some of you will have been to look at the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. When you go into that building, pretty heavy security, is there not? You must behave yourself while you're in there. Anybody seen the film National Treasure? It's that easy to take the Declaration of Independence, isn't it? Maybe not. Well, you may also know that that National Archive building occupies its own block, and there are 4 statues. Quickly show you those. 4 statues on the 4 corners. And one of those statues relates to heritage. And the quote that was taken from Wendell Phillips, a 19th century abolitionist, to me is a beautiful summary of why our heritage is relevant. The heritage of the past is the seed that brings forth the harvest of the future. Let's take a moment to reflect on the parable of the seed and the sower. When the sower woke up that morning, what was his responsibility to go and do? Sow seed. If he didn't do that, how much seed was going to be sown? None. There was going to be wind, rain, sun to produce good fruit, but if you don't sow seed, nothing's ever going to grow. So, folks, we have a responsibility, do we not, to make sure that we go out and sow that seed. The heritage of the past is the seed that brings forth the harvest of the future. So we must make sure we don't think that this is somebody else's responsibility, because it's your responsibility. It's my responsibility to go out and to sow the seed if we want to see the harvest of the future. A short time ago, you said you wanted to see these pews full. Is that still the case? Nothing's changed in the last half hour? Okay, well, you've got to go and start sowing some seeds. Simple as that, yeah? So I hope that what I've shared with you this evening will have inspired you to think about, well, what's my story? What's our story? How do we want to engage with the people in the city of Kenosha? What is it that we do that's going to interest them? And in that sense, I think you will then begin to unravel those stories and uncover those stories to allow you to engage with people. Because bottom line is, if we don't, we could be the last ones holding the baton. There will be nobody to pass it on to. In Westminster Abbey in London, we put plaques up to commemorate some of the great Britons, and in that sense, John and Charles feature. 2 quotes from John. "I look upon all the world as my parish." That's a good quote, isn't it? Anybody remember where that one came from? Oh yes, Bristol. And "the best of all, God is with us," from his deathbed. 1 quote from Charles Wesley: "God buries his workers but carries on his work." I'm going to break this news to you folks. John and Charles Wesley are no longer with us. So the baton has been passed. We have a responsibility to take that baton on and do something good with it. So that's what we need to focus on, taking it forward. Because folks, who wants to be the one that drops the baton? Most of my questions are rhetorical, you understand. The heritage of the past is the seed that brings forth the harvest of the future. So what I've been doing this evening, what I'm doing on this trip, is essentially just trying to encourage you in your work, your ministry, to think about not only the day-to-day stuff that goes on, but what are the stories associated with this building? What are the stories that you want to tell? What's your story? I can't speak for anybody else here, but I think evidence shows that by far the vast majority of people come to faith through personal relationships, being invited to events, churches, services, etc. What is it that we're doing to engage with those people who at the moment don't know this story? Because it's critical we get that message out there. We do have a story that we think is worth sharing. Do we? Yeah. So let's get out and share that story. So GCAH is there to help you with that, and I hope that I can be a useful resource to help with that purpose. I can't promise to be in Kenosha every year to come and check up on you like John Wesley did. My horse is not called Alan. My horse is called Southwest, Amtrak's, British Airways. But yeah, here you are, an opportunity to use your heritage to engage with folks. So I'm going to just pause there because I think you've heard a lot from me, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that you've not all fallen asleep yet. Are there any questions that folks would like to ask of me? Because I've been asking you a lot of questions, haven't I? Yes, ma'am.
A couple of points.
Yes.
One point is just to expand on your analogy of the seed.
Yes.
Being an old farm girl. Nature abhors a vacuum. And so if you do not plant the seed, what is already in the ground will grow. And you will get a crop, but it's not the crop you want. You will get the crop of weeds or whatever is there. And so that is what we are seeing in our culture, is a lot of stuff that we don't want going on. It doesn't just have a nothing, it has a negative. So we need to plant the seed to keep the negative in check.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for sharing.
I once read a historical novel that, well, it was mostly history, but it had a statement in it that at the time of the French Revolution, there was a great deal of decadence in the church and the royalty in France, and it wasn't a great deal different in England at that time. But England did not have a bloody revolution, and some people claim that the Methodist movement had something to do with that. Have you heard that claim, and do you agree with it?
Yes, I have heard the claim, and I think there is some truth to the statement. I don't think one should say that England was saved from revolution exclusively by the Wesley brothers, but I do think that the Wesleys' willingness to engage with the hardest to reach sections of society, telling them that God loves them, God has a plan and a purpose for their life, I think gave meaning to lives which otherwise could have been very quickly radicalized into revolution. So in that sense, yes, I think there is an absolutely valid point that is made. I just wouldn't want to overreach and say the Wesleys exclusively saved Britain from revolution. But as you know from your own experience here in the United States, you know, revolution was in the air, and yes, you know, Britain may have followed. So yeah, I think that there is certainly a lot of credence to that observation. Yes, yes.
Thank you for your time. As you've looked through the history of Methodism, well, you'll see where I'm going in a second, but were there rises and falls in membership? And if we're in a current membership, I don't want to say fall, but, you know, couple percent a year here and there, you have any guidance on that? And you can do this off the top of your head because we're, you know, yeah, we're out in the community. We'll be in the community. But I don't know that the community's coming here. And so talk to me about that. Just, you know, I don't want an hour lecture, but say, you know, I can't.
I'll time myself.
I can't be the first person that asked you, what do you think about the membership decline?
Well, I think as far as membership is concerned, I think both in the UK and the US, the membership of Methodism was strongest in the 19th century. So in that sense, you could argue that the Methodist Church, in terms of membership, has been in decline for well over 150 years. But of course, it depends where you start as to where you end up. I think with regards to engagement with people, I think there is much to learn from the way the Wesleys conducted their ministry. And that's why I shared that quote from John arriving in Bristol as a high Anglican. One of the reasons why the Bishop of Bristol was so upset with John Wesley is because exactly that. If you wanted to hear the word of God being preached, you had to go in to the church. You know, it was considered vulgar to go and preach in the open air. But I think what the Wesleys say, and I suspect we might have some empathy with this observation today, is, well, look, if the folks aren't coming in, we've got to do something about that, and we need to go out. Now, what they did was not just to go out and preach in the open air and say, are you saved, brother? Are you saved, sister? They then responded to those folks who had heard the message about, well, what are the other practical needs that we are struggling with? So, for example, the Kingswood miners, colliers, they wanted access to education for their children. So the new room in that sense is the oldest Methodist schoolroom in the world. Wesley had a lifelong interest in the use of herbs for medicinal purposes, wrote a book called Primitive Physic. And again, this was available for people to try and alleviate some of the pain and suffering they were experiencing. So I think what's critical, as I see it, is that we are prepared to go out into the wider community and say, what are the issues? How can we help you? And that's going to take us out of our comfort zone in the way that it did the Wesleys. You know, if you want to use that term, submit to be more vile, fine, go for that phrase. But what's critical is that I think we've got to be willing to meet people where they are, as opposed to, I think too often, we expect people to come and meet us where we are. And I think it's difficult when, you know, if you've been in church for many, many years, if you look at church notice boards, they always say, all are welcome. And I have no doubt that if somebody walks into this sanctuary, they would be made to feel welcome. I'm sure of it. But then, of course, you've got the rather daunting prospect about, well, when do I stand up? When do I sit down? When do I kneel? When am I supposed to go up here? Communion? What's all that about, you know? You know, I think we've got to find a way to engage with people and say, look, this is why we do what we do, and perhaps make it a little less intimidating for folks. Now, I appreciate it's very easy for me to stand here this evening and just share all of this, and I'll be out of town in 2 days, and you think, well, he's gone, you know. But I think, you know, if we are serious about wanting to bring about revival, if we are serious about wanting to share with folks about why we believe and what we believe, I think these are the things we need to be doing. So, you know, I've had more than one person say to me, well, what's the relevance of the Wesleys in the 21st century? My short answer to that is a lot. There is much to learn from the way they conducted themselves in the 18th century to the way we do things today. So please don't think that, you know, I've come up with all the answers for you and you're going to, you know, enact those and, you know, revival will happen in Kenosha within the next 2 weeks. You know. But what I am saying is, you know, do think about how you go about that engagement process. You know, again, I don't know the city well enough, but, you know, I've come from Chicago. I was at the Temple UMC this morning in the Loop. They offer a ministry with the homeless, for example. You know, need for provisions for those folks. We did the same at the New Room. We're right in the heart of the city centre. So, you know, what is it that we can do that engages with people and hopefully demonstrates our love for them? I hope that helps to, yeah, thank you. Right, okay. Anybody else with any questions? We're all out of questions, are we, guys? Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah, well, I think obviously it was a delight to welcome you to Bristol. I hope many of you enjoyed your Wesley Heritage Tour when you came over last year. I think based on the presentation I've offered tonight, which I have offered at other churches and locations I've been to, it seems to me as though getting to know some of your Methodist heritage sites and landmarks here in the US would be a great thing to do. And in that sense, I'll continue to work with educational opportunities to see if we can put something together that would help you on that score. Yeah, you know, these are stories and we want to tell those stories, and I hope that what I've shared with you tonight will help you in that process. So thank you for the invitation, and as I said to Susan at the time I was invited, you need to be serious about this, because if you invite me, I will come. And I'm here in the city of Kenosha. So, you know, from that point of view, don't just make an idle invitation, because this mad Englishman will come up and take you up on it, all right? Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and pleasure to share with you. Thank you.
David, we thank you very much again for being here, and thank you for challenging us to embrace our heritage, to learn, continue to learn and grow in that understanding, and then to move it forward into the future. We appreciate that very much. So there, Sally and Brooke have prepared some goodies for us out there and a reception to greet David, so please join us out in the great room and continue the evening. Thank you for coming again.